Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, pursuant to our discussion this morning, I contacted the retirement fund and was advised that they would not be coming this afternoon, and I'll leave it to Senator Duenas to report on his contacts with the administration.
Senator Duenas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I have no further questions after having listened to the explanation. And I want to thank you, Madam Speaker, and the body for indulging the opportunity to possibly go through the committee of the whole process. But in my contacts and conversations with members of the fiscal team, they're at least understanding of our attempts moving forward. So we'll see what the final disposition of what we work on and pass in this body. But as far as the committee in the whole, it looks like there will be no need for that, Madam Speaker. So I'll continue to listen to the debate, and I thank the body once again for the opportunity to have a good conversation on the issue. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator.
So, Madam Speaker, I currently have on the floor a motion to strike Section 15 and replace it. I believe everybody got a copy of the provision that I would like to in its place.
So everyone
And all it is for them to get together and talk and get back to us in 90 days so that we can have something that we can work with, as opposed to trying to prophesy or read their minds as to what would be acceptable.
So on the amendment to delete Section 15, and well, we're going to do that first before the Vice Speaker offers then a replacement for Section 15. So on that amendment, is there anyone who would like to speak on the amendment? There being none, so on the motion then to delete Section 15, hearing no objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleagues for understanding the reason for us doing that. I proposed a replacement for Section 15, and it's been circulated. It's got instructions for the retirement fund and to the executive branch to enter into discussions and to get back to us in 90 days with certain things that they believe that could provide savings to the government, but while at the same time protecting the interest of the retirement fund members and retirees.
On the amendment, this amendment was given to us this morning. Is there anyone who would like to speak on the amendment? So hearing no objection. Oh, okay. Senator Yamashita, you're recognized on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I think this amendment does as well. During the public hearings, it was really clear that the Government of Guam Retirement Fund's leadership, their board members, were very, very willing to go to the table with the executive branch to determine how we can best address, how they can help. They were very willing to help. They just did not want to have something done that they did not support or buy into. And so that whole beginning conversation where they were together apparently didn't happen. But throughout the public hearing, they said they were very willing to come together and determine this. And so perhaps it's unfortunate that we have to mandate a conversation and collaboration. But with that being said, I think this will really help us, would help define that this is what we think needs to happen. If indeed the retirement fund reform, if there is to be any retirement fund reform, and how that might help with the whole economic situation. So I support this amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. So on the amendment, no objections, so ordered. Mr. Vice Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, at the public hearings, and those of you that attended, I thank all of you for being patient with us and attending the 5 hearings that we had on this bill. But the other thing that the retirement fund stated that they were very, very opposed to and were very concerned about, because of their desire to try to make the to address the unfunded liability. And so, in recognition of their insistence that we have to protect the retirement fund, I move that Section 16 also be struck.
On the amendment,
That's the unfunded
strikes.
liability, the extension of the amortization period by about 10 years, going from 80 to 90, and they were very opposed to that. In fact, I was talking to one of them, and the reason why I wrote this, that the replacement for 15 was they were almost more willing to try to deal with an early retirement than the extension of the amortization. It was just too big a hit for them to be taking, and they were too concerned about the experience in Northern Marianas retirement fund, and they wanted to try to as soon as possible make the Guam Retirement Fund as viable as possible. And so I ask that Section 16 be struck.
on the amendment, is there anyone who would like to speak on it? There being none, so the motion is to delete Section 16 in its entirety, which goes over to page 19 up to line 13. Is that correct? So on hearing no objections, so ordered. Mr. Vice Speaker, you still have the floor.
Madam Speaker, in an attempt to try to address this, you know, and I want to thank everybody for allowing 15 and 16 to go. But in Section 10, the governor wanted to repeal the lump sum payment for annual leave prior to taking, and I'd like, can I? I know she's not here, but I want to give recognition to Senator Mabini. She introduced Bill 395 on how to address this lump sum payment. And I'd like for us to consider, since the 395 did have a hearing, and it addresses allowing for some of this annual leave, but to also make sure that people don't keep coming back and retiring and coming back and retiring and coming back, just to collect on their lump sum. If we could just have a minute and have us, I've just taken 395 and turned it into an amendment so we could get that into this bill. If anybody else has other amendments they'd like to make, I'll sit and I'll wait until my copy comes back. Thank you.
The floor then is open for others then, and I recognize Senator Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as the intent of Bill number 507 is to find ways to raise revenue, to identify where we can save on cost, so that we can, I suppose, better live within our means. And I know the early retirement program was supposed to help us do that, and we just amended that out. And we did invite the retirement program and the fiscal team to be with us right now to further discuss it. And that being said, and in reviewing bills that we've had to address cost, there was Bill 517, I believe it was, that was introduced by our Vice Speaker, and it talked about salary reduction. And I would like to offer that as an amendment. I'm not sure where it would go, but I would like to raise it, and I'm very interested in deliberation. I cannot say how much a 10% cut for all elected or unclassified employees appointed by the governor to any agency, autonomous agency, public corporation, commissioner, branch of government, base pay greater than $50,000 will net us. I don't know that. I know the numbers are being worked on right now. But I do guess that it'll be something. It's probably not going to be 14 million. It's probably not going to be 4 million. It may not even be 2 million. But it might be close to 1 million. I'm not sure. And at the beginning, when all the conversation was about cutting pay, I was one of the voices that said we really should do a study to see how people are earning their money and if they're earning their money and what kinds of accountability systems are in place. And as that conversation snowballed, there were some folks who wanted to just cut certain people. And while I really believe that people who are found in or gotten to certain positions of responsibility and authority, we earned that. We earned that. We earned a seat in this legislature. It was never a giveaway. We earned that. Anybody who's serving as a director or a deputy right now, they earned that. That's not a giveaway. When a sitting governor looks at who can best serve, they choose whom they think has a knowledge base, who can work well, has a vision, a team player. They earned that. It's not a giveaway. So anytime people start talking to me about just cut, and when they did it months ago at the beginning of this term to some of the people in the front office, I was vocal against that. I said it's the wrong thing to do. But it went through. And now we're at a point where if I am to believe press releases and reports that are put in front of me, we have a serious financial issue. And so while some people may be surprised that I'm raising this as an amendment for deliberation, the reason why I am right now is because indeed if we are in such dire financial straits, and as long as everybody takes a cut, right, and if that would really help us make ends meet versus some people not having a job, which I am totally against, because when you don't have a job, you go from one line to the other, and the other is really the welfare line, and we already know that a third of us are in that line already. So if this amendment is going to help us make ends meet, then I would like us to really talk about that. And then perhaps when times are better, when the outlook is better, then maybe we can revert. However, I still would like to see a study done. I know the Hay study was done, and I know that even with that, it's not being fully implemented, or it's only being implemented to a certain degree. So while I really am not one for saying that all directors, all elected officials should get cut by 10%, I am saying because people are telling me we're in a serious financial situation, at this point I offer this. I'm constantly being told if you're not going to do the early retirement, then what's your plan? And so I'm thinking this might help us a little bit. I also want to offer, as people constantly say or talk about the legislature, I want to repeat what I know you've said, and that is that this Guam legislature has repeatedly cut, has repeatedly gone from a 5% cut to a 10% cut. I know that my office, we're all ready to take the cuts. This happens, we'll take a pay cut as well. But because we're in this with everybody, I think all of us are willing to look at the possibilities. So I passed this amendment out much earlier today, and I look forward to the honest deliberation. Will it make a difference? Should we offer it? Should it not be done? And I look forward to the intelligence of this room to render that decision. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the amendment, I recognize Senator Palacios.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I support the intent of this bill. Definitely, in the past, we have heard of some actually so-called stage retirement or resignation only to get the lump sum and then come back the following within the 48 hours. Clearly, that's what we would like to address. But as I look at this amendment, which I support with some reservation, of course, which I would indicate is that, if this probably would apply to positions in which the occupant voluntarily resign or retire for the purpose, of course, and then drawing the lump sum. But I would like to suggest this amendment.
Senator, we're not talking about the lump sum yet until the vice copies were being made and the vice speaker.
I thought that's the.
No, we're talking on Senator Yamashita's amendment.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought
No,
that.
it's not a problem because I know we were in between.
Okay.
So
I take that back then.
Yes,
and
I
I'll wait
will
for my
call.
turn.
I'll put you down for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Amendment. Okay, we're going to take a brief recess to look for the copy. Okay. Senator Yamashita, you still have the floor. Because now everybody has a copy of the amendment.
Thank you. And so I'm getting a specific number of how many at the front office have received a 10% cut, but I was just told they were all senior staff and special assistants got a 10% cut and above. But again, I'm getting a clear number on that. And so again, this amendment I raised for purposes of discussion in an effort to see if this is a way that we can realize a cost savings. For the last month, 6 weeks, the conversation throughout the community was people taking pay cuts. And so again, I am against across the board pay reduction. However, because I am told that it's a serious financial issue at hand, this might be able to help our government make ends meet. And so I look forward to the conversation. And that being said, Madam Speaker, then I'm going back to this. Is there really a financial crisis at our hands? And is there? And maybe that's a real important part of this conversation as well. And if there is, people just need to say, yeah, there is, and things are going to end, and doors are going to shut, and wells are going to dry up, and power is going to go out.
Thank you very much, Senator. So on the amendment, okay, Senator, I have Senator Respicio, Duenas, Vice Speaker. Let me know if you raise your hands if you'd like to speak. Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this amendment, and I want to congratulate and thank Senator Yamashita for proffering this amendment that's pretty much been the general and the collective will of this body, and this body's willingness to demonstrate our ability to and our resolve to do something like this whenever it's necessary. If you recall, in a previous legislature, that legislature did not hesitate to reduce our salaries, as in fact we took a 27% pay cut because that administration moved to have a 32-hour work week to not across the board to non-essential GovGuam employees, and that's where you create this huge angst in our community and this segregation of classes of services where you say one is essential and then the other group is non-essential, whereas I'm of the opinion that the parts of the sum equal the whole, and every single employee that's hired in whatever branch of government, if they were hired, then they should have been hired because their services are required to fulfill that agency or that branch's mandate. There's been a lot of criticisms about our branch of government, Madam Speaker, and this legislature has always been hand-to-mouth. We've always been hand-to-mouth. We came into this legislature anticipating a $500,000 projected shortfall, but we dealt with it. We dealt with that, and it wasn't a deficit because if you recall, as the Vice Speaker also said, of the three branches of government, the legislature doesn't deficit spend, the judiciary doesn't deficit spend, it's the executive branch who for some reason gets to spend beyond its means. And this amendment makes it very loud and clear that we're going to put an end to that, and we're going to do whatever's necessary in the confines of Bill 507 to make sure that the governor's proposal by way of an omnibus spending cuts bill is being addressed by this legislature. And I'm hoping this kind of amendment will be amenable and acceptable to the administration. I'm also wanting to say, Madam Speaker, that we also took a 5% cut in this upcoming budget year. And while the legislature, while the judiciary continues to take cuts, we see the executive branch's budget continue to be increased. In one fiscal year, the governor's office got $1 million more, while the other branches of government did not get $1 more, but we got cut. And so when you talk about the separation of powers doctrine and how we're separate but co-equal branches of government, and then you look at how these resources are being divided, and it's not only divided based on the priorities of health, education, public safety, it's divided based on a governor's priority. And that's where I think we have to come together as a body and recognize our power also as a legislature to make sure that the priority is there, to make sure that tax refunds are paid, irrespective of what other obligations need to be paid. We've heard this governor criticize this branch of government for not paying tax refunds, and last I checked, we don't write any checks, Madam Speaker. But the last I recall, he was criticizing this branch of government for not paying tax refunds, saying not paying tax refunds is stealing from the people. And then in following the court order or the settlement judgment settlement with the district court, this administration has gone on record saying that they can't pay tax refunds even within a 6-month time frame because it'll collapse the government. But what business does he have holding on to those monies one day after it's required to be paid? Even one day of withholding tax refunds and not paying these taxpayers their money is unconscionable. And I don't see how we can allow for that situation to continue without holding the administration accountable. And this amendment is one step toward doing that. I want to offer an amendment to this amendment and to simply put a period after Superior Courts of Guam. Because if you look at the way this amendment is being offered, and I commend and I continue to recognize the bravery of our colleague, Senator Yamashita, and this sentence where it says, or unclassified employees whose salaries have already been reduced in the prior fiscal year, how do we know that those salaries have been reduced? Really, and if you recall, it was our appropriations chair that asked for copies of those personal actions, and they could not produce those personal actions immediately. So I think to avoid ambiguity and to avoid any apprehensions to implementing this amendment should it pass and should this bill be signed into law, I just say that we put a period after Guam, and so if the front office did in fact take a 10% salary cut, then this 10% will be in addition to what it really says it's what their base salary is. And so I don't see it as being another 10% on top of the 10%. I just see this as us giving him the statutory authority to do what he claims he's already doing.
Thank you. On the amendment, Senator Yamashita, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If indeed we know, and I just got a document saying that there are 18 employees, 18 public servants in the front office who did receive the 10% pay cut, and 11 are pending pay cuts. And 11 right now is not the topic of this amendment, but the 18 are. But if we are to say that that period after Guam will not in any way have these 18 people take another 10% cut, so then they end up taking a 20% cut, then I'm fine with the amendment. And I already know what the mover of this amendment is going to say, that the front office will make sure of that, and they'll just say that's already a 10% cut. But I'm just raising that as why we specifically put in that language. So we didn't want the 18 people who took the 10% cut to take another 10. Thank you.
You're welcome, Senator. On the amendment, no objections? So ordered. Senator Duenas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, once again, thank you for the opportunity to rise in full support of this amendment. And Madam Speaker, maybe I will just take the opportunity as well to recap on some of the comments of the author on the amendment in general. And as well as your comments, Madam Speaker, over the last 2 months. It would be almost humorous to say the last to recap once again the conversation of the last 2 months in terms of salaries of elected officials, appointed officials, and in general, the financial condition of this government. And there's no question that none other than myself had introduced legislation to roll back, and that's why I want to provide that clarification, roll back a salary increase that this legislature experienced for the senators for the purposes of attempting to address some of the crisis that continued and somewhat continues to exist at Department of Public Works when it comes to busing our school children to and from school each and every day. Madam Speaker, there also is no secret over the last 2 months that there's been a number of efforts to include yourself and other members of the community, to include the federal government, to include the Department of Education, to take the bull by the horns and ensure that this crisis was given its proper and due attention. So now we have this proposal in front of us. And at the time, Madam Speaker, when I discussed the merits of the rollback, once again, that I continue to reiterate, that I proposed, was the issue of placing money in places that need it, to lead by example, to share in the sacrifice. And I do agree with you, Madam Speaker, and I agree with other members of this body, that time and time again, the sacrifice has been displayed. And I will continue to understand and support that notion. However, I will also continue to say that in that instance, it was a recognition of that rollback that was the emphasis and main emphasis of at least that particular piece of legislation. So once again, it would be remiss for me not to recognize the efforts and understanding now in recent conversations with Public Works, and like as I said, your efforts and other efforts of the members of the body, that crisis is being given its due attention. And I believe in the coming months and years, the busing crisis will come to an end. So this is a very appropriate amendment, once again, Madam Speaker, as the retiring Speaker and the author have pointed out. And I agree with, that is, when you do propose these cuts, appropriate it somewhere. Put it somewhere where it counts. Put it somewhere where we've been telling the community over and over again, we want to deal with the issues that confront us and face us, to pay our people back the money that's due to them and not borrow from them who are least able to provide for that borrowing capacity. So I'm in full agreement with this amendment. I commend the author, and I look forward to voting on its passage. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the amendment, Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, I just rise in full support, and the retiring 3 speakers are more eloquent than I could ever have argued at this point, and so I'm really thankful that this amendment is going through, and I fully support it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Speaker. So if there's no one else who would like to speak on the amendment, there are no objections. Would you like to close, Senator? Okay. Senator Yamashita?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our legal counsel raised perhaps an amendment that I think does need to be considered, and that is on the second line of the proposed amendment, notwithstanding any other law, the base salary of each elected or unclassified employee to any agency, autonomous agency, public corporation, commission, or branch with base pay greater than $50,000. It is recommended that we omit or delete appointed by the governor, because sometimes these employees we are appointed by a board, by a commission, but we are unclassified. And so I think that's a very good, wise catch, if agreeable by the body.
So the amendment will be to delete the words appointed by the governor.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So on the amendment without any objections, so ordered.
And then, Madam Speaker, if I may, I just had a sidebar with the Vice Speaker, because I'm getting texts, messages being flown my way, and the question now by people watching is why are we not including the judges or justices of the Supreme Court or Superior Court? So in the brief conversation, it was shared with me that that really is a wise step to prevent from any kind of perhaps political, or not political, court,
Decisions.
yeah, court action, thank you, court action. And that apparently there's already history or case law where, you know, the branches and the determination of their pay is decided. And so I respect that, and I certainly, you know, I learned from the others who are here. So I appreciate the conversation. And again, I have to say that, you know, one size never fits all. And I really, it's with a heavy heart that I'm actually doing this, because one size does not fit all. We have people who actually earn their money. There are people who are underpaid, and there are people who don't deserve their paychecks. But in this time and day, if, you know, as the government is in a serious financial issue, this is a way for people in leadership, people who have found themselves in an area or in a position of responsibility and authority to really help out everybody else. So leadership never hesitates, but I have to say leadership also should be appreciated, and we should make sure that the accountability systems are in place. And when the time comes when financially we're better, I would like to see us readdress this, or whomever the sitting legislatures at that time, to readdress it and relook at pay, accountability, and professional developments. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. So on the amendment that has been amended, Senator Ada, you recognize?
Madam Speaker, thank you. Just a real minor amendment that was made. It should read, I would propose that it should read, notwithstanding any other law, the base salary of each elected or unclassified employee of any agency. So actually, just strike the word to and put in the word of.
So on that amendment to strike to and replace it with off without any objections, so ordered. Thank you, Senator. Senator Guthridge, you recognize.
Madam Speaker, I have a question. Two questions.
Can you
One,
please state your question?
thank you. Does this provision consolidate any benefits as well as straight salary into a figure of $50,000 and above? Or does it simply refer to straight salary and not the benefits?
And who would you like that question addressed?
Yes, I would.
Who would you like to answer the
Anyone
question?
who would like to address it.
Is there anyone who would like to take a stab at it? Senators? We have a senators inquiring. We have a sidebar going on, so I'm going to take a brief recess. Legislature is back in session. Senator, we left off with Senator Guthertz. Senator Guthertz, you have the floor before recess.
I asked a question.
And
The purpose was to get some information, so now I just suggest that carefully this be constructed, Madam Speaker, to understand the repercussions and the effectivity and who it applies to. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Senator. So that's the last person that I have on the amendment. But I'm going to recognize Senator Yamashita either to close or make further amendments.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I know that there is another senator here would be interested in moving an amendment, but during our break that you allowed us to have, it really wasn't a break. There was lots of conversation going on, and I'm not sure procedurally how to do this. To answer all the questions that were raised by the previous speaker and by a couple of other senators, I have language.
Yeah.
May I withdraw my first amendment?
Yes, and you're going to replace it with one that's written up again,
And I would like to
incorporating the previous amendment.
I request that I withdraw my amendment and replace it with an amendment that has just been passed out.
Okay, so on that motion, without any objections, so ordered. Okay, your new amendment then is?
Thank you. The new amendment, notwithstanding any other law, the base salary of each elected or unclassified employee to any agency, autonomous agency.
Oh, well, you've got to put off. Okay.
Correct, sorry, of any agency, autonomous agency, public corporation.
Please continue, Senator.
Of any agency, autonomous agency, public corporation, commission, or branch of the government of Guam with base pay greater than $50,000 shall be reduced by 10% effective January 8, 2013 to December 31st, 2014, but said salary shall not be reduced below $50,000. This provision shall not apply to judges or justices of the Supreme or Superior Courts of Guam or those in federally funded positions. The 10% reduction in this previous section of this bill is hereby deappropriated from the respective agency appropriations from the general fund, if applicable, and reappropriated to the Income Tax Reserve Efficiency Fund. Madam Speaker, this amendment addresses the concerns of that were raised, such as when does this really happen? It addresses the concern of if you're making $50,000 and you go below, then you end up earning a lot. You may be earning a lot less than your supervisor. The scenarios were described to me. And that the judges or justices of the Supreme Court are not included in this for reasons that we've talked about before, or those in federally funded positions, so that those who got grant money for their positions, we won't have to tinker with those proposals or those approved action plans. And so I'm hoping that these measures, this amendment addresses those concerns. Now, I do know that the question of really how much are we talking about is raised. And again, it really may not be a lot. With the 17 senior staff and the governor and the 2 senior staff and the lieutenant governor and 5 directors who've already taken a 10% cut, I believe that savings is near 100,000 or 120,000. That's ballpark. And so those, of course, folks are earning 55, 60,000. And there are those of us who are not earning 70 or 60,000. So, but again, the point is this. The point is, if the issue is those who are in leadership position, are they willing to take pay cuts so that we can help make ends meet? And I think this says that we are. We are. And again, I appreciate the conversation, which is why we are here. And I look forward to further conversation to see, indeed, if this is in the best interest of our island. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. Senator Guthertz on the amendment.
Madam Speaker, I have two minor amendments on the amendment to make it clearer. The first one is, I think, in the alliteration of government entities, the first use of the word agency probably should say department. So it would read, notwithstanding any other law, the base salary of each elected or unclassified employee of any department, autonomous agency, public corporation, commission, or branch of the government of Guam. So simply change the word agency in the second line to department, any department.
On the amendment, the back row, like any classroom, the back row is always not paying attention. So on the amendment, I want to ask you guys if you support the amendment to delete agency and replace with department.
Yeah, we're using agency twice here, but the first agency should actually be department, any department.
No objections? Thank you for...
And the second amendment also is for clarification. I think
Okay,
it should
and-
say, where it says, but said salary shall not, it should be, but said salary shall not be reduced for those employees who receive pay below $50,000. Something is missing in this line here, so for those employees receiving below $50,000.
No,
I know what
don't-
I know what we're
No,
saying. We're talking about the employees that are described here, but you have to make it very clear, because to me it's a little confusing, Madam Speaker. It says, Governor Guam, with base pay
If the
greater than
salary is greater than
$50,000
$50,000,
shall be reduced by 10% effective January 2012. But said salary shall not be reduced below. But said salary shall not be reduced
lower than $50,000.
below, shall not be reduced for those employees whose salary is below $50,000.
No, no, no. I don't think. I think that. Can the senator please clarify?
Yeah, explain this because it's confusing.
I will do my best to try to do this from parking slots to parking lots to money. Okay. I just had my first bill vetoed. I just want everyone to know. The reason why this language is this is because that the base pay greater than $50,000 shall be reduced by 10%, but said salary shall not be reduced below $50,000, which the intention is that for these folks not to earn less than $50,000.
Yes.
Shall not be reduced below $50,000. Yes. Well, for these persons, I'm sorry, I'm probably not supposed to be dialoguing like this.
Senator, can you please? Senator Yamashita has clarified, and you still have the floor. So if you want additional clarification or questions asked, or
For these employees shall not be reduced below $50,000, Madam Speaker.
I'm sorry, can you say? Can you?
Okay. But
If I may,
Yes.
but said salary for these employees shall not be reduced below $50,000. So right after salary, just put in for these employees.
But we are talking about all the whoever all the employees are, so it's not anybody else. But
No, it's just those employees that make more than $50,000, right?
okay.
Because
So
the
for
second part can be interpreted not just for those employees.
Okay, so your amendment is to say, but said salary for those employees.
Shall not be reduced below 50,000.
Okay, so for
That's
those.
all, yeah.
Okay.
So
Just for clarity.
to add
For
then
those employees.
an amendment where it says, but said salary, add the words for those employees, then continue, shall not be reduced below $50,000. On the amendment, no objections? So ordered. So on the Yamashita amendment that has been amended, are there any objections? Oh, Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of this amendment. However, wanted to find out and ask what is the real impact of this 10% reduction in salary that this amendment calls for. I mean, it's very good when we hear we're going to cut salaries, we're going to cut budgets. It sounds very good. I mean, it's the politically correct thing to do. But we need to know what the impact is, how much savings, since this is a savings bill, how much savings are we going to realize from this cut? That's my first question, Madam Speaker. The other issue or question I want to bring up too is that we're saying here that the reduction, the 10% reduction from these cuts would go into the tax refunds. I know that we've been talking about the need to pay tax refunds. It was a politically correct thing to talk about as well. However, we went out twice in the bond market to pay tax refunds. There's a lot of other initiatives before us, or initiatives that have been adopted by this body that would divert monies into paying tax refunds, and that's something we must continue to do. However, one other obligation that, not that we forget about, but one other obligation that we need to also bring to the forefront is the obligations to vendors. Most especially for me, what I'm passionate about is the debt that's owed by the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. It was from 22 or 23 million. They've cut it down to about 21 million over a few years. Some of that is a result of this body also finding any little funds available to be able to send their way. And so, Madam Speaker, I would propose that on the second part of this amendment.
You want to, first of all, have your question
Okay, my
answered?
first question, please.
Yes, and then maybe that might help you as
Okay,
well in your
please.
amendment. So, Senator, do you yield to the question?
Yes. That is actually a question that we have raised and we're looking into, and we know that OFB is helping us figure out those numbers. And so I don't have a number right now, but we are working on that.
Earlier, if I may, you had mentioned certain number of individuals.
Earlier, based on what the front office, the senior staff of the Lieutenant Governor's office and the Governor's office and 5 directors, it came up to, in my quick calculations, it came up to a savings of $100,000.
Thank you very much. Is that answer then your question?
No, not really. I mean, well,
What-
partly. I mean, we have some number,
Yes.
but we,
At
I
least
think
some
it's very
number, yeah.
important for us also to know the exact amount of what will result in this type of reduction. And so that's the first part. The second part would be to amend where we're saying these savings would go to. And I don't have it written out, and maybe if I can ask the legal counsel to help me after I speak on it. What I would like to see, Madam Speaker, is that that the savings from these 10% reductions go to the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, and have it offset from what the government of Guam owes the hospital. We know that from a very recent hearing that about $4 million is owed by the different agencies and departments of the government. In this fiscal year's budget, we have identified, I believe, $1.2 million that government agencies shall remit to the Guam Memorial Hospital within the fiscal year. And so whatever savings we as a result of this 10%, I would propose that it go into the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority's the debt that GovGuam agencies owe the hospital.
On that amendment, which is, you want that on the last sentence where it says, and reappropriate it to the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority to offset what the government owes GMH. In essence, that's what it is. And not to the Income Tax Reserve Efficiency Fund. So on the amendment, no objections to the amendment? So ordered. Oh, I am so sorry. So can I please make sure then that the clerks, that you have the language? So on the amendment that has been amended, is there anyone who would like to speak on it? No, the amendment now, just before we pass it. No objections to the amendment that has been amended? So ordered. Yes? No? Okay. Senator, Vice Speaker, you had passed out an amendment earlier. Well, the Vice Speaker's one that we didn't address yet. He passed it out. The lump sum payment for annual leave. Oh, okay. All right. So, Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I certainly appreciate the discussion this afternoon and the focus on trying to find additional cost avoidances which would really translate into savings that can pay critical areas of our government, whether it's going to be tax refund or monies owed to the Guam Memorial Hospital. Any savings wherever necessary will certainly go to alleviate the kinds of fiscal pressures that are being placed on this island's government. And so I offer two amendments. The first amendment, Madam Speaker, deals with a public law 31-154, which we had passed a year ago. And while my amendment is just 3 sentences, I went ahead and made a copy of that public law that deals with continued transparency and accountability and kind of getting a handle on the amount of press releases that we've seen from this administration in particular, press releases telling us that reorganizing Department of Land Management results in a $200,000 savings, and then yet we don't see whether or not those savings actually translate to reducing the overall cost of the government. So what could certainly have transpired is they could do some type of reorganization in one agency, and because the governor has transfer authority, he can transfer those funds to another agency, and so you're not really seeing any impact to reducing the overall deficit. And so what that law does, it says that any budgetary savings or cost avoidances realized within any general fund budget and appropriations to any executive branch agency due to a Magallanes reorganization of the government of Guam be used for purposes of reducing the government of Guam's general fund deficit. And in this law, there's a section that de-appropriates that budget and puts that savings or cost avoidance into retiring the debt. And so at the time the administration supported this bill, I'm very pleased and was pleased at the time that the governor signed it into law. It's Bill 330-31, signed into law as Public Law 31-154. But the problem, Madam Speaker, is for the last year, you have not received a single report from this administration pursuant to this law. And so what I'm offering as an amendment in this Bill 507 is non-compliance, is a Section 4, which would provide for non-compliance and failure of Imagala and Guahan to submit a report pursuant to Section 3 of this Act will result in a 5% reappropriation of Imagalahan's annual budget, and the savings shall be used to support the reduction of the general fund deficit. And so this will be a new section that would be added to Public Law 31-154.
On the amendment, any objections to the amendment? Hearing none, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. My next amendment. My next amendment really deals with this continued desire to want to reduce the expenses of our government, and it would repeal a provision in law that we allowed this current governor to have at the beginning of his term. As a matter of fact, we passed a law December while he was transitioning into the governor's seat. We passed that law. There was a technical amendment that was required. So we passed that law again. And I recall that you hand-delivered this to him as a sign of wanting to give him all the resources necessary and the wherewithal so we can effectively govern the executive branch. And so now that we hear him say that we're at this fiscal cliff and that tough decisions need to be made, I'm offering as an amendment to Bill 507 that we repeal the authority to allow him to have employees who are already retirees of the government of Guam. And so we would essentially eliminate this practice of having double dippers in the executive branch. And so this amendment to Bill 507 was to add a new section that would take away that authority of him to have people on the payroll who are already retirees, and they would have the option of electing. They still want the job, then they would have the option of electing to suspend their annuity, and so there's still that provision available in law. It would be one or the other, but not both.
Thank you, Senator. On the amendment, Senator Yamashita, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, on the amendment that is before us, I object and I disagree to. And the reason why I do that is because while I understand folks will say, you know, you have your annuity and then you have your paycheck, you really don't need both. That's perhaps true. Maybe you don't really need both. But I would like us to consider that those folks who are retired are of service, and I think shall be provided an opportunity to finally earn some money. For example, you know, as a teacher, we know how little that annuity is, but then when UOG would pick me up, I'd get a little more money. And so collectively, I finally am earning something that I can actually treat my children to. The quote-unquote double dipping notion, for me, does an injustice to the retirees who are of great service. It does an injustice to the leadership who says, I need you to help us. I need you to help us, and you are of such value of what you've done and what you have given, and I would like to pay you in addition to whatever your annuity is. I also ask us to consider that anybody in charge of an organization or of a branch be allowed to really choose whom their team shall be. I really think that's a critical part of effective leadership. I really do. And I really do think that saying that I'm going to speak with a retiree and tell him or her, yes, I welcome you to my team, but we're going to have to go through the processes to suspend your annuity, really puts a whole kink in that. And I see the retiree as somebody of that type of value, that they invested in the retirement program, they gave the service, they paid what they needed to, the government paid their share, and then they earned their 21, 25, 30 years. And they got to that point where they're going to earn 60, 50% of what they earned, but then somebody else is saying, take a few months off, but then can you come work with us? And so I just think that's a management tool that I ask that we allow the people in charge of running these different branches to be allowed to make that determination. And I know we're talking about fiscal constraints right now. I get all of that. But again, I think, you know, let us each be responsible for how we live within our means, and then be really accurate in how we are spending wisely. So, Madam Speaker, with all due respect, I object to this amendment.
On the amendment, Speaker Pangilinan, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I certainly agree with the retiring speaker with regards to that retirees have a value. But the problem with that, Madam Speaker, is some retirees have a value, the others don't. The only people who can take part in this are the political hires. The only people who take part in this are those that make a lot of money already. But why is it that the guy at Public Works who's put in 30 years, who's making $15 an hour now, cannot retire and come back to work? Why is it that it is only those that don't have any kind of political power who are precluded? Why do we preclude the Parks and Rec guy who spent his entire life cleaning out after the public in the parks? He cannot retire, who's making $20,000, $40,000, $30,000 a year. He cannot retire and come back the next day. But the guy working in the air-conditioned room who campaigned can. It's just not fair. That's the issue I brought up when this issue was being discussed. It's not fair. If it was applied fairly, yes, but it's not fair, Madam Speaker, and to say and to preclude those that most need that second income. We've got retirees who are retiring at $90,000 a year, coming right back to work, getting their $90,000 in retirement, and then making another $90,000 on top of that. I'm not saying that they don't need the money because I don't know their financial circumstances, but Madam Speaker, doesn't that seem excessive? And why is it that the guy who's worked 30 years, who's making $15,000, and when he retires, he's going to take home $12,000, he can't come back to work to supplement that $12,000. But we're going to allow the guy making $90,000 to take $90,000 and come back to work at $90,000 a year? That's the unfairness in this. And if you don't see that, then you don't know how this government works and the realities out there of this government, Madam Speaker. And I have seen that, and I have seen that put into place. I have seen it put into practice, and that's why I've always opposed this provision, Madam Speaker. And that's why I was the only one who opposed this provision, I think, when we first initially discussed it. It's the unfairness of how it's applied, Madam Speaker. And I really, really feel that if we're going to allow this, then allow the guy, you know, who needs that additional income to come back to work to a position he just vacated, because he's the one that needs to feed his child. He's the one that who's, you know, who doesn't have the income that these other people are afforded to because of just plain old unfairness in politics, Madam Speaker. And that's really all I have to say on this. If it was fair, okay, but it's not fair, and this perpetuates the unfairness. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. On the amendment, Senator Palacios, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I tend to agree with the senator from Senator Yamsida with respect to, you know, the idea of double dipping, Madam Speaker, the way I see this, it's not so much providing an opportunity for individuals to be employed for extra income. It's not about paying for labor. It's about paying for expertise that is scarce, that the government needs, that's not readily available. So the incentive there is to pay for that expertise. And my perception of this is that the annuity already is earned. It's entitlement to a person who has worked for that. The second job is a second job for which anybody else, even if it's not the retiree, this government would have to compensate somehow. So whether the person is getting 2 checks or 1 check, the first one, in the case of a retiree, it's already earned. And so it's not an opportunity to be employed, but for this government to pay for expertise that is scarce. And that's where, in my opinion, the idea came about this double dipping. And it's not readily, I mean, double dipping for, let's say, ordinary position when there are several hundreds out there really to fill that position. But how many are available really to manage a department or to be a chief of staff or of an important position? I mean, you can count it with your 2 hands. So the pool is not there. And so the incentive is to allow this person to keep the annuity and then be paid the way that anybody else will be paid if anybody else is available at that point other than, you know, a retiree. So, and the idea of forming together a team to administer a responsibility such as the governor's office, the judiciary, or this legislature, I think should be reserved, I guess, to the leadership of these branches in a very, I guess, a small group that's just core to the management and the administration of that branch of government. That's how I look at the idea of double dipping. And I support that based on, of course, on in this case, the governing body for the autonomous agencies, I guess the governing body of the judiciary, which is the Judicial Council, the legislature, which is the speaker, I think, and then, of course, the governor's office. And that's my comment with this. So thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. On the amendment, Senator Speaker, would you like to close?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I certainly appreciate the comments by the retiring speakers and the different perspective that's being offered here. But what I'm offering here by way of adding a new section to Bill 507 as amended, Madam Speaker, is to give the governor some choices. If you recall, he submitted a bill to this legislature and he claimed that it would save, it started off with $49 million, then it's, for some reason he said it would be $70 million. When the Vice Speaker presided over these oversight hearings and public hearings with the administration and members of the Retirement Fund, it was determined that that bill would not achieve those kinds of savings that the governor was saying that it would. He also, in that bill, it also included drastic changes in the manner in which our firefighters are compensated. And those are extremely very critical and important positions. And it took us at the public hearing to make the motion that we take those sections out. And so what we've heard also, because we never really had an opportunity to talk to the governor as much as you've asked and I've asked and other members of this legislature asked, to really sit down and have that most important discussion that's needed. It seems to me that all we've been able to do is to understand what he's trying to do by either way of a press release or by way of his interviews in the media. And as much as we want to have this very important communication, we've also heard him say that if we don't like any of what he's offering by way of solutions, then we have to come up with our own. And so here's one opportunity to demonstrate some savings here and to recognize that there are individuals within the classified service of government that can accelerate to take these positions. And and I appreciate the comments of our good speaker, Pangilinan, where he really forthrightly called this what it is. This is a provision that allows the governor and lieutenant governor to bring back certain retirees who they believe that they are connected to politically, philosophically, and they could use these retirees to drive their respective agendas. But if you want to ask me what we're faced with in terms of decisions we have to make, Madam Speaker, and for me it comes down to, do we allow for him to have these double dippers and yet not make our obligation to taxpayers not be very strong and firm and do everything we can to make sure that these tax refunds are paid on time? And so that's the kind of discussion that we're going to have, and this amendment will certainly demonstrate our willingness to go as far as we can. And although the bill was amended to provide for payments to GMH, that's also very important, Madam Speaker. But the more we find savings from within this government, the more these vendors can be paid, and the more the tax refunds can be paid on time, and the more Guam Memorial Hospital can continue to receive subsidies from this government. And this amendment is just one way of doing that. And so I hope that, notwithstanding the objection that was made, I hope, Madam Speaker, that we would be able to pass this amendment so that the governor will see that we are equally serious about finding additional means to have some kind of savings within this government of Guam.
Since there is an objection, I'm going to call for the vote. So in favor then of the amendment, please raise your hand. In favor of the amendment. In favor of the Respecia amendment. Seven votes. Sorry, it fell. Vice Speaker, on your amendment, 7.
Madam Speaker, I'm glad the retiring speaker reminded us of a section that was and should have been taken out, and I'm chagrined, but I didn't review this as carefully as I should. And so section 12 and 13 really should be removed. Those are the fireman provisions that I thought had been taken out, but had been left in.
So the amendment then is to delete section 12 and section 13 that deals
As it relates to the firefighters.
To the fire department. Okay. on that amendment to delete 12 and 13, no objections? So ordered. Yes,
I know
to
that.
delete.
I did too.
And
There is, and I know we were just discussing about double dipping and leave, Madam Speaker, so I'd like to go to section 14. I mean, not 14. Section 10 on page 13 was the repeal of lump sum payments. I passed out an amendment, and it has 4111, Chapter 4. The section currently reads, notwithstanding any other provision of law, an employee of the government entitled to annual leave may, prior to his taking of such leave, receive lump sum payment in cash equivalent to the amount of leave authorized to be taken, and the period's there. That's how the section currently reads in law. Senator Mabini and I introduced Bill 395, where we take into account the availability of funds and have a provision and subject to the availability of funds, and we strike that may prior to his leaving, and instead put in shall not receive a cash lump sum payment equivalent. A payment shall be made by the appointing authority upon availability of funds of 20% of total amount to be paid no sooner than 30 days after the employee has physically vacated the position. The remainder of the amount left shall be paid at 20% each month thereafter until the total amount is paid in full. In the event that the same employee is reinstated into the same position, vacated, or into another position in the government within 30 days of vacating former position, payment schedule of annual vacation cash equivalent shall be terminated. What we were trying to address at that in this Bill 395 and in this amendment that I'm proffering on our behalf is that try not to have these, like we saw a couple of years ago where some of the directors retired and came back on within hours of their retiring and receiving their lump sum payments. Other employees are allowed to retire, take their lump sum payment, and then be reinstated the next day without even an announcement of the position being open. And so this is just to make sure that if you're going to go, you're going to go, and subject to cash availability in the department, you'll receive 20%. And so if you're actually gone after 5 months, then you have the entire amount, and that's it. But if you're going to come back within 30 days, then stop. The payment stops at that point. That's to make sure that you actually are leaving and not kadua.
On the amendment, I have Senator Frank Blas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the author of the amendment can yield to a question. The question I have is in reference to basically the last sentence in this amendment. If the individual returns within 30 days of vacating the former position, and assuming that there was only the first 20%, or no payment has been made, does the individual then regain all of that annual leave back, or is that just lost?
Mr. Vice Speaker, do you yield to the question?
We're only paying them 20% increments, but if they come back and let's say they only got paid the first 20% and they have 80% left, and they come back into a position, have they lost all that annual leave?
No. That annual leave is still...
Doesn't say that.
No, the cash equivalent is terminated. Payment of the cash equivalent shall be terminated. That's all that stops. If you're going to cash in on 320 hours...
Understood. I understand. It's just that the way it's individuals left, and I think it's just a procedural thing, because as the individuals left, they're already eligible to receive the total amount. But if it's 20% increments, what is the process of putting the annual leave back in?
I'm proffering this as a suggestion. If this doesn't,
No,
if this isn't accepted, we will just go with what the governor has, a repeal of the lump sum provision completely.
No, and I totally agree, and with regards to the schedule, I'm just looking at that portion of the unpaid leave, and while one can argue that it's going to be put back in, the silence in this can infer otherwise.
You gentlemen want a brief recess to discuss this? We're going to take a recess. The legislature is back in session. I know we had a lively discussion during recess. So, Mr. Vice Speaker, you're recognized on your amendment.
Madam Speaker, I thank everybody for their input, and I think for clarity, I'll just withdraw this amendment, but just remind everybody that Section 10 is still here, and I don't know how.
Before he withdraws, yes, Senator Tamara, you're recognized.
Madam Speaker, I think the intent of the amendment really is good. Maybe we just made it a little bit more complicated than it really needed to be. And the bottom line is what we're trying to do is this 24-hour, I resign, next morning he's back on the job, and he's been able to withdraw his cash and continue as if nothing happened. And I think that is what we're trying to stop. And so, maybe a simple way is that if we were to go by the amendment, in 5 months, that individual would have been able to withdraw all of his or her leave. And so why don't we just say, if you resign, payment of your annual leave, something to the effect, and we'll have to sit down and language it, but shall be paid sometime in 6 months. So it could be paid today, could be paid 6 months from now, but we also cannot just dismiss the fact that I think that when people do this, they may very well have a legitimate need. It may be that cash in which allows them to buy that ticket for a family member to go off island to get medical treatment. So, I think to think that people just do this because they're trying to scam the government, I'm sure there's some that do that. But I also believe that there are those who may have a legitimate need, and it'd be sad that guy is going to get thrown under the bus because we got, a couple of the scammers has gotten to us. So, if nothing else, I think if we word it that way, then really let the appointing authority have the discretion to say, there really is a legitimate need here. And maybe even after if he's going to be paid everything today, maybe put in a cooling off period of 60 days. Such that we do away with this 24-hour turnaround time. But I think the intent of the amendment has merit, and we just need to make it less complicated. So I would ask the mover of the amendment to maybe just hold off until tomorrow, give us time to look at it and maybe language it so that we're still able to achieve the same intent and do what in fact it is that we're hoping to accomplish here. So I would just simply ask the mover of the amendment to refrain from withdrawing the amendment.
Thank you very much for that, Senator Ada. I think actually when you look at the time, that this might be an opportune time for this body, the legislature, to recess until tomorrow morning at 9.